Dear students, today we are going to discuss in this lecture, the topic is structural violence. I am Dr. Smita M. Patil, teaches in School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU. Let me briefly introduce about this topic, what we are going to look into. Structural violence is something that every day we do face, and therefore particularly the category of the women, LGBT, transgender and others, and therefore it's very important to understand. Let me briefly talk about what is the relationship between violence and society. Violence against women is the major concern of the women's movement in the world and India. Women's movement or the feminist movement from the very beginning took up the question of violence. Does violence only impact women or men or to other genders? In fact, violence does create everyday problem in the life of children, women, able bodies, vulnerable communities like Dalit, tribal, Adivasi, transgender and LGBTIQ+, and so on. So let us understand what is violence, and then to know about what is our understanding of violence, let us get into this some of the figures which the experts have actually brought in the data. So it is, what is violence? It is in fact a reflection of the patriarchy and the power. Around 34.6% of the transgender people reported to be victims of physical abuse by their own partners. I mean, you can understand through this that how do they face the internal violence within their own private spaces. So violence against women with disability in the forms of sexual assault and violence on them are increasing. And therefore, it's very important to understand the politics of violence, which is gendered in nature, and the social institution. Now, let me explain what does it mean social institution here. Social institutions are within the structure of family, kinship, marriage, religion, are the basis of perpetuating gender-based violence in the society. And in the contemporary society, factors such as genocide, ethnic cleansing, and the displacement have created conditions to perpetuate gender-based violence. So what is gender-based violence? Let us try to understand what is gender-based violence. Violence is a use of physical force to inflict injury on others. Violence has broadened to include improper treatment or the verbal abuse, and in society you would see that every day we do face the violence, right? So it takes place both in micro and macro level, such as within nation state, communities, within the intimate relationship respectively. Various forms of violence are used to protect and maintain the interest of the privileged group, and it continues to lead to systematic destruction of the individual. And across the globe you would see that in fact the ways in which the forms of violence are happening. The best example can be that in America how racism operates. So incidences and occurrences of the gender-based violence is increasing with the institutionalization of the patriarchal ideology over centuries. And one has to understand that how patriarchal ideology over centuries are functioning and carrying this the violence on various genders. So the rate of the woman experiencing violence is high compared to the men as the victim of the violence. And you would see that if we in fact just wanted to explain to you that if we go by statistics, one would see that any government, if we have to figure out and look at the data which is available in several institutions, one would see that the violence against women is increasing. However, both men and women can be seen as a perpetrator and the victim of violence. So it happens on both and other genders also. And as a construction of gender differ across societies and cultures. The gender-based violence takes various shape within the culture forms and the practices of every society. Violence against women include rape in private and public spheres, childhood sexual assault, sexual harassment in the workplace, killing of the woman in the name of honor. These are the few examples. And you could see that the number of sexual assault on the children or from the childhood, children do face, and they are not able to speak out sometime. And as a result, you will see that the people, those who face the violence, those who experience in fact the violence since childhood, there will be in future as they grow, there will be always been some kind of sense of insecurity. There will be sometimes behavioral problem. As a result, that you see that it in fact the complete personality it destroys, because one has to understand therefore that how do we actually look into these debates very seriously. Now let me take you to make you understand. Let me make you understand the forms of violence. In India and also across the globe and several other countries, wife beating is widespread phenomenon. And I would cite here the example from Jordan. In Jordan, which exists across the age, class, education and religion, violence against women is very, very common. However, the figures of the wife beating are not presented in the official statistical records in Jordan. And similarly, the sexual violence is used by the men to subordinate women, that is central to the maintenance of the patriarchal social order in the society. And you would see that, as I mentioned to you, in some of the culture also, it has been practiced, the violence. And it's a very, very common practice, that it's a part of the culture. So no one is actually thinking that, how, the woman goes through in everyday life. So the case of female genital operation, which we call it in the Women's and Gender Studies, FGP, and it's a very, very common even in today. You can see that the female genital mutilation, which has been taking place, and South Africa is the best example to narrate several number of stories. And it is most of them, the ways in which they actually engage in this process, which is extremely painful. And as the child comes to the stage of puberty, the process started. So it's a very, very painful for the body of the girl child and for the woman. So female genital operation is simply a product of colonial, where it comes from. So it's a product of colonial dominance and patriarchal tradition, of course. The issue of female genital operation can be compared with the sati of India or foot binding practice of China. Let me also briefly talk about what sati means in India and this binding practice of the foot binding practice of the China. In the ancient China, as the girl child born, they used to tie the feet. So as the feet should be very beautiful, that is an indication of the beauty of the Chinese girl. And sati, as you know, that Raja Ram Mohan Rai Fort and Lord Bentinck also brought out this act, the Sati abolition of the Sati Act also, which was there, which is an effort which Raja Ram Mohan Rai fought for. And it used to be in 19th century, the child marriages used to be happen, and when the husband used to be elderly person, as the husband dies, that the woman have to go in the funeral pyre of the husband. So that was a system, and one would see that what kind of pain and agony and the violence the women have to go through, or the children have to go through that time, because they are not also grown up, so I would call it children. So these issues are the manifestation of the power ruling interest to the practice of violence. Precisely, it looks at the association between woman, tradition, and the institution of structure. Because sati is again been a tradition, and then there's whole debate which Lata Mani articulates, Confucius tradition, which is a very known book written by Lata Mani, in which she's trying to actually argue and figure out. And of course, there is also been again an angle of the private property, why women have to go for the sati. So the distribution of the private property which women wanted to own should not be given to the her. That was the crucial issue, the issue of the the resources. So one has to understand. So the process of the genocide and the ethnic violence is a gendered in nature, as men and women targeted differently in the process of eliminating a particular group or the ethnic community from the boundaries of the nation state. And I would just cite one example, like Aboriginal people from the Australia. Now the population of the Aboriginal peoples have been wiped out, and you would see that the majority of number, of course Australia is a multicultural nation state where more than 180 countries people went and settled down. That's the best example to accommodate a plural multicultural nation state to respect each person's culture, secular views. But at the same time, who were the natives, the Aboriginals, their numbers are gone down. Why is it that? Because of the ethnic violence, the indigenous people who have been killed there. So Hedman in 2005 in fact addressed the subject of the gender and violence in the process of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. So let us also understand that in the past how rape and sexual assaults were used as an immediate instrument of the war and any other forms of the conflict, because it used to happen on the bodies of the women. So the processes of the elimination of the particular ethnic and culture group impact women and men differently and in a structured way. So there is a systematic structured way or the method actually to erase some people. And I already mentioned to you about Aboriginal peoples from Australia. Now, how the pattern of the sexual violence actually operates, we need to understand. Selzent in 1998 has identified 5 patterns of the sexual violence which occur during any kind of conflict and fight. As he pointed out, the 5 patterns of the sexual violence and the ethnic cleansing. Sexual violence occurs in connection with the looting and intimidation. Sexual violence takes place in correlation with the fighting and the attack on the village. Collection centers and rehabilitation camps are the site of the rape and sexual violence, and you can in fact see that, for instance, the Rohingyas issues, the refugee issues, the immigrant issues, the migrated people, the ways in which the women actually are vulnerable, and you would see that these women often do face rape and sexual violence kind of experiences they do get. So rape and forced impregnation in rape camps constitute a part of ethnic cleansing, and it's a very, very common. If you really want to look at that, look at the amount of literature which is available on Syria, or Iran, Iraq, or where the wars are taking place and had happened also earlier. Most recently, the 20th century I'm talking about, in which you can see that how women are facing the problems, the children are facing the problem. So sexual violence occurred in the centers of the prostitution setup to provide service to the soldiers, and these are mostly that is what Hedman says. So these patterns of sexual violence are universal to the process of nation building or asserting the dominance of the particular ethnic group with the other. These forms of violence include sexual violence and occur in the course of war, dispute over land or natural resources, and in the construction of national identities. And you would see that if you take example of the Afghanistan, or you take an example further, you go ahead and see the Boko Haram, how women have been abducted and raped and killed. These are the classic example which you can see in the everyday life through social media or news or the print media, and try to analyze that. So some examples would be that there are the evidences like Bosnia-Herzegovina. It can be the issue of the Kaveri water in Indian context, in the border of the Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, the ways in which the petitions and the quarrel goes on reflect that men used to rape and the other bodily assault to terrorize and humiliate the women of the other ethnic or the culture groups. Or it is a rape is a tool actually which is used often. And another example, I just wanted to say that to rape women with the impunity and to mark their bodies with the symbol of the other side is a way of establishing authority and symbolically assert the ethnic identity of the other group in the protected space. That is what Kumar Swamy argues, right? So one has to understand that the ways in which violence operate in the bodies of the women. So men are also raped and sexually mutilated by the other men in the name of the construction of the nation. And this is not only happening for the men, but it is happening with the children also. And if you look at the figures, India is also one of the country in which the sodomy cases are happening in rampant numbers. So people's bodies have been used as a platform of such kind of the public violence to occur in the construction of the nation state or ethnic group or the communities. So bodies of both women, men and other categories always targeted in the case of the forced militarization to secure the boundaries of the nation state in the case of communal conflict. As I mentioned to you, the Rohingya issues, which is a classic example to understand the ways in which the refugees have been targeted, right? Or you take example of the Bangladeshi refugees, the ways in which the women have been targeted. So more often, gender, race and religion are seen as an intersecting categories to inflict sexual violence against women. So, and I just wanted to reflect few ideas on the domestic violence also, because domestic violence even in India is a high in number, and the debates on the domestic violence are centered on the issue of the gender and the forms of violence perpetuated by the men over women. Sociological research has shown that various indicators of the structural inequalities such as family status, income, and the income incompatibility between the men and women, because there is again been a variation that who earns what, the wages. As you know that there is a gender bias, and even women tend to earn even more money than the man. But then in the household, what kind of position she holds in terms of the autonomy, decision making, we all of us knows that very few women within the private sphere, getting that autonomy and power. So educational differences, son preferences, caste inequalities are influencing the occurrences, right? And the assault in India and the globe. And domestic violence is a very common again, and as a result, you will see that across the world, the different legal interventions have been done. Now, feminists have argued that violence is a part of the patriarchal society or a system of sustaining dominance and power relation between men and women. Domestic violence is also a form of coercive control through which men establish the social dominance over women. And you would see that it starts from the, a sphere, which is a private sphere, and then it goes reflect to the public sphere, that it doesn't remain within that, but as a result that if it is always that you would see that domestic violence which is happening within the home, the ways in which then it reflects to the society. So similarly, it is a systematic way of controlling women and other marginalized groups to maintain authority in the society. So there have been theoretical differences concerning the various issues of the domestic violence. Sociological data, which was generated through the method of the National Survey, found out a strong relationship between domestic violence and the age, cohabiting status, unemployment, social economic status. And feminists have offered a methodological critique of understanding the issue of the domestic violence and argued that the large-scale studies could not analyze the domestic violence in the context of its occurrence and completely ignored the aspect of the power relation between men and women. Similarly, feminists have shown that interrelationship between domestic violence, existing structural inequality, culture construction of the femininity and masculinity also reflect on that. So women accept the dominance of the men in the forms of perpetuating violence. Women are always associated with the care work, and the femininity is characterized with emotion, love, understanding, and patience. Scholars have further indicated that isolation of the modern household in the United States have contributed towards increasing violence in family and household level. So extensive literature on the gender issues have been focused on the interplay of the gender with caste, race, ethnicity, and sexualities. And one is to understand by, for instance, middle class men were able to maintain their dominance over women as they have control of the household income. And you would see that in the context of the low caste woman, this debate is very prevalent even in India. So however, the sources of the power got eliminated for working class men as women entered in the labor force during the post-war period. It's shown that there is strong link of the domestic violence with the socio-economic status of the woman and men. These social practices collectively represent the dominance of the men and women and manifest power in the forms of perpetuating domestic assault also. Therefore, many women tolerate abusive partner because of their association with the caregiving and nurturing work. So, women's limited access to income sources and the other resources of the household has led to them to tolerate domestic violence. Structures like family, religion, caste, and community have become the source in the process of this penetration of the violence. Certain social practices such as sexual division of labor within household, in the workplace, men marrying the women from the low socioeconomic status, men marrying from the upper economic class, help in constructing gender relations differently. And working class often lack power and authority, which in turn compel them to show aggression and rigidity upon the woman at home. Therefore, individual position in social class become the determinant of their access to power and economic resources to construct masculine identity. This culture construction of the masculine identities as aggressive and rigid are related to domestic violence. Violence is considered as a means to maintain power and masculine identity. Now let me also explain to you honor killing. Honor killing forms a part of the family or a community-based violence which supports the idea of the public patriarchy. Family or community's honor is believed to rest with the woman's adhering to society expected norms and patriarchal expectation with regard to the marriage. Women who deny parents' authority and the rule of endogamy within marriage are often perceived to bring dishonor to the family or community. And feminists, in fact, have questioned this whose honor is we are talking about. So there are several punishments such as social ostracism, denigration of the family, social status associated with the institution of marriage, and the extreme forms of denying the woman's right to choice of marriage or the right to choose the partner is achieved through honor killing. In order to understand the entire lecture, let me sum up that what we understood this lecture through this lecture. When one is talking about structural violence, it's very important to also understand that in the Indian context, the communal violence, the caste violence, these are the two important issues which we need to understand. When patriarchy as a system intersects with the other systems of the society like economy, religious, legal, culture forms, it leads to the occurrence of the more gender-based violence. And in Indian context, as I mentioned to you, the caste violence and the communal violence both comes under the form of the structural violence in which the society, Indian society, which is based on the structure of the caste. So upper caste or a dominant caste people do not like actually the low caste people, the ways in which their upward mobility. And as a result, you would see that in numbers of the rape cases have been happening within India. And in a similar way that the communal violence which took place and a number of cases which after independence we have seen in 70 years that a number of the minority people have been killed. So as a student, I hope that you enjoy this lecture. Thank you.